to behave here. Okay. Starting in a few seconds. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Also, I am a certified empowerment coach and president and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching and Communications. And this is another epic conversation. I host epic conversations, and they're only epic conversations here. And this is sort of like a 7-year wait. You ever heard of the 7-year itch? This is the 7-year itch. We are very blessed and highly favored to have a gentleman that I've highly respected for many years. Many, many years. I regard him as a music icon, not just a Canadian music icon, but just a music icon. It is Michael Williams. He is a dynamic, talented producer, host of talk radio and music-related radio and television programs. He appears frequently on Toronto TV news networks and radio, sitting in as a guest host on News Talk 1010 radio talk shows, which is based out of Toronto. Famous for hosting the popular Soul in the City series. And I still have some VCR tapes of Soul in the City.
Everyone does.
Everyone does, for MuchMusic, which was syndicated in 19 European countries and Japan. The Power Hour and Electric Service on the MuchMusic television network. He's interviewed politicians, newsmakers, international recording artists, and filmmakers, including Stevie Wonder, Whitney Huston, Quincy Jones, Celine Dion, Tina Turner, Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, and Mark Wahlberg, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll just go that way. And a short little story before we get into sharing with Mike. When the Dr. Vibe show first started out, when I had hair, I remember I reached out to Michael and said, Mike, I'd love to have you on the show. And he said, if you want to come out and see me, you got to come all the way out to Hamilton. I said, oh my, okay. And that caused me to start doing television and webcam conversations. So Mike indirectly expanded my network because I said, I'm going to go all the way out to Hamilton. I don't want him to cancel on me halfway out. So I said, okay, got to input this in. But we are very happy to finally, after 7 years and a little bit, and many conversations, especially outside of the Ontario Black History Society's most recent February launch, where I spent a very wonderful and powerful and educational hour and a half with Mike Williams. Mike, welcome finally to the Dr. Vibe show, home of epic conversations. How we doing?
We're doing great. Glad to be here finally. And it was good to see you at the OBHS brunch there and have a chat. But there were some wonderful things going on that day and some incredible musicians that I was honored to see. And my very good friend Spider Jones picked up an award that day as well. And it's a wonderful time. It's a wonderful place to share information and people get together. You know, it's sort of like Canadian Music Week used to be. We would, because it incorporated the Junos at one point in time. So everyone in radio and music got together and saw everybody just once a year. So that's what it's like at the OBHS brunch. And Jojo Cento was there as well. Yes. And just a number of really good friends. I've actually only been going to that for the past 2 years. I was invited by Pam Houston and Michelle, who work at the OBHS, and I had never been really invited to the event before. Just there are a number of events that I'm surprised that I haven't been invited to. The Harry Jerome Awards, all of that stuff. They had the Prime Minister this year, and good on them. So how you doing, Matt?
I'm just excited. I am jacked, as I like to say, because I'm telling you, this has been another dream come true, and I just stayed persistent and consistent and worked with you in regards to making this happen. And before we go any further, Mike, time being, will be doing down the line a number of different conversations because his knowledge is so wide and so wealthy and so healthy. So if you think he's going to jam everything into the next hour, it ain't going to happen. It's impossible. We're gonna get him to share some of his story. You may interact with some music stuff, but down the line we'll get into the music stuff. So Mike, like we like to do with most new friends who come on the Dr. Vibe show, take us back. Where was Mike Williams born? Where did he grow up?
Well, this is kind of an interesting time for me because I've been beginning to write the book. I've been meaning to do it ever since I left Much Music back in the day, but it wasn't exactly time then. It would have only been part of the book and part of my life. And I've been going over a number of different things and preparing to write the book and writing notes and stuff like that. So I'll give you a little bit of it. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, July 25th, 1956. And on the way to the hospital, my mother asked my aunt, Maisie, what my middle name should be. She yelled Derek, but it was a storm. It was one of those stormy nights like the song Voodoo Child, you know. It was one of those kind of nights in Cleveland. And the only thing my mother could hear amongst the wind and everything rustling around was she didn't hear the D. All she heard was Eric. So that's kind of how I got my name, Michael Eric Williams. And I was born and bred in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was a wonderful place to be in. It still is the rock and roll town of a lifetime. They used to use Cleveland as a test market back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. If a record was a hit there, well, it had international implications for that record if they treated it right. And Cleveland always did treat music pretty right. And I was honored as a kid to see the Cleveland Orchestra every year, which was a wonderful influence on me. Every year, every kid in the city for free would see the Cleveland Orchestra performing various classical pieces, different ones every year. We would learn the music, then we would learn the composer, about the composer and the story behind the music. And it was sort of that Leonard Bernstein period where he was taking young people through pops concerts and teaching them and getting them excited and involved and enthralled by classical music. And I was one of those kids. I saw the Cleveland Orchestra at the age of about 6 for the first time, and at the age of 16, I was working for them.
Wow.
So that was pretty important to me and a pretty influential time, and it was about the power and the glory of the music. So that's where I was born, and that's sort of how music began. Also in my house, my mom had like a Time Life set of records, which was the greatest music of all time: American songs, classical songs, Russian songs. It didn't matter. It was the world's greatest music, and she would play that ad infinitum. But also, my mom would sing. My uncles were guitar makers and performers. And if you grew up in a black neighborhood in the 50s and the 60s, it was like a walking transistor or crystal radio. Because when everybody turned their radios up just a little bit, you got the vibe all the way down the street, around the corner, in the alley, out the cars. So there was music everywhere. And that was pretty usual for black neighborhoods in America, but maybe unusual for another country, be it Canada or any place else. So it was always a pretty exciting time. And it was around the music and the arts and theater and culture. There was so much of that. And we never had a doubt that we would have a black president because I believe in 1967, 68, we had a black mayor, Carl B. Stokes. So
Yes,
we knew that
yes.
we knew what we could be, and we knew what we were. We always took that line in hand, I am somebody, from Jesse Jackson. My mom always used to say, you know, what do you want to be when you're a kid, when you grow up? Do you want to be a crumb bum, a nobody, or do you want to be a somebody? And being a somebody did not mean you had to be rich, but it meant that you had to distinguish yourself in some sort
Nice.
of way, to your community, to your family, to yourself. And education was the most important thing coming out of our house and in our neighborhood.
Let me ask a few things since you've just shared with us. You were surrounded by music. Was there encouragement for you to get involved with music at that young age? Because it sounds like all the relatives were involved. Your
hmm
mother would sing, your uncles. So was there an encouragement for you to get involved in that more than education, or more education than music?
Well, I felt that music was a very well educated thing. I thought that musicians were always well educated, whether it was by them learning on their own, by ear, as some people would say, or whether you had a teacher. So I took some guitar lessons, some tenor guitar lessons early on by a guy that just walked up and down the street. Um, and in school, in about seventh grade, well, actually, in elementary school, I remember this. That's when things, because there was musicians all around me. My next door neighbor played bass. This guy played this. So there were groups all around us in the neighborhood of musicians playing. Then there were the singing groups. I sort of went to the singing groups because with the singing groups, you didn't have to have the money to have an instrument,
Right.
right? And in like about between fourth and sixth grade, it was time to choose your instrument. I went to choose my instrument, and I was a projector kid, so I was busy doing something else. So I got there a little bit late. The fact that I got there late meant that there were no instruments left. And just about that time, they started taking music out of the public schools. It
Okay.
didn't just happen in the 80s, it started happening in the 60s. And so they started taking music out. So there was more areas of the arts that I could be involved in. I could be involved in theater, and I found that in my school. I still went to the music department to practice drums and whatever, even though I wasn't officially a part of it. I asked the professor if I could go in when I had time, and maybe somebody could show me a paradiddle or something like that. So I did it on my own time, but I didn't do any official lessons. Like the family didn't push that on you. Sort of more African based. I think in Africa everybody sings and everybody plays a drum. Not everybody gets up on stage, but everybody can party. So it was more like that. But music did play a pretty strong music, the arts and culture played a pretty strong place in my life because I spent most of my time at the library listening to records because you could listen to records for free at the library. Sometimes you could take them out. I didn't need to take them out. I got a pair of headphones, you know what I mean, at the library. And I would listen to things like the band Rock of Ages and Iron Butterfly and just anything that I couldn't afford at that time. But when I could afford it, all my money was going towards hanging out at the record store, buying records. And I'll tell you, my very first 45 that I bought was
Yes.
But It's All Right on Warner Brothers with J.J. Jackson. That was
Nice.
it. That
And
was
do
my very first one.
do you still have that record?
I do. And
Good.
my first album would have been The Meters, the album with, I think it was called, there was a track called Sophisticated Sissy, and it was just called The Meters.
Right.
And it had Sissy Strut and Sophisticated Sissy on there, and it was like, whoa. That was it. My next album was probably the Temptations album with Psychedelic Shack and Cloud Nine. So I remember those things distinctly. And I have a pretty large and extensive record collection, and there's still some of it at my mother's home back in Cleveland, Ohio.
So going through Cleveland, how long did you stay in Cleveland? And while you were in Cleveland, how much more did you get into the music scene?
I mean, to be into the music scene in Cleveland, you just really had to step outside of your house because it was
Zach,
happening
okay.
everywhere. It was exploding, and a big entrance to music for me was elementary school, high school, because there was always something musical going on there, or wanting to be musical going on there. And I started DJing dances, but I also worked with the school's theatrical company to do the soundtrack for plays. So I was pretty involved in theater at the community center up there in Collingwood. We did sort of a street theater version of Shakespeare's Caesar, and that was selected to go to New York, and we performed at Lincoln Center in New York. Same stage share by John Lennon and Yoko Ono and T-Rex. So I was pretty happy about that, being a major John Lennon's fan, but even more a Mark Bolan and T-Rex fan. Nina Simone was around at that time, and just a bunch of kids going to New York, multicultural kids going to New York to perform their version of Julius Caesar, of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, was just phenomenal, and it was a great time, and I that was the first real music experience where I was creating music to be performed by other people. I wrote the soundtrack, I wrote a few songs
Wow.
on it, and all of that stuff. I did the whole soundtrack for that play and a couple of others. So that was early on. I never thought of it as being, I was writing songs and all of that. So I didn't think of it because when I thought musician, I thought going to school, going to Juilliard, going to Berkeley, studying music, all of that stuff, and your fingers bleeding, and I was really more or less having fun. So I never thought of myself as a musician from that point on until maybe recently, even though I produce stuff in the studio, I play in the studio, I sing in the studio, I co-produced the Nylons. We were nominated for Juno. I worked on Circus Alegria, and many other records and with many artists, but I never really considered myself a musician. But Jackie Matu did. He said to me, you're a musician. I'm going to do these tracks and I'm going to leave some space in there for you to play. So I went, okay, but it was funny. But yeah, I mean, the most recent thing I would have produced or worked on was a track with Herb Alpert and Willie Williams, which is coming out, a wonderful track called Stepping and One More Step. Beautiful track, and I love working with Willie. For me, in music, if I can feel it, I can work with it and through it.
I'm gonna, during our conversations, I know the names that you're dropping, but they're, with this worldwide audience, there may be some names that
Well,
you
okay.
mentioned, like Jackie Matu.
Jackie Matu
Yeah.
was one of the two most important keyboard players in reggae music. He was Jamaican through and through, and though Prince Busta was the first Jamaican to do Jamaican music for Jamaicans, and at that time you may have called it ska. There was Spooge, there was Rocksteady, and all of those names were synonymous with the beats going on and the feel of the music. So Jackie Matu took over when Monty Alexander, who was the original Studio One keyboard player and also the keyboard player most preferred and most loved by Frank Sinatra for all of those years. He left Jamaica, went to Florida, got discovered by Frank Sinatra, went to New York. When he left Jamaica, Jackie Matu moved right in there, and Jackie was a mover and shaker, played with everyone. The Wailers used to wait for songs by Jackie, and he worked with Willie Williams, which was an up-and-coming young singer from St. Anne's Parish, where also Bob Marley and Burning Spear and Michael Rose are from. Actually, Michael Rose is Willie's cousin. Well, Willie and Jackie got together and did one monumental reggae song after another, the main one being a song called Armageddon Time. That's where you may know Jackie's name. He also co-wrote a song with Leroy Sibbles called Pass the Dutchie on the Left-Hand Side by
Yes.
Musical Youth and many others. He also taught UB40 a lot and was one of the producers on Labor of Love, and they owe a big debt to him. Reggae music, period, owes a huge debt to Jackie Matu, because when reggae was being invented, past the point of ska, everybody was in the room and Jackie was telling people what to play and how to play it. And he was a maestro. He was a maestro and a master. He had a group called Sound Dimensions, which was morphed into another band as well, who Willie is working with now. So Jackie Matu, the greatest reggae musician ever. Willie Williams co-wrote the song Armageddon Time, and that song has since been covered by many people, from The Clash to Shinehead to the Fugees at one point in time.
It's amazing. And another group that you mentioned that probably just mostly people in Canada, if they're old enough, would know, is the Nylons.
The Nylons, a fantastic a cappella group. They were inspired by the Persuasions. And by the way, Bare Naked Lady, Canada's own Bare Naked Lady's brand new album, features none other than the Persuasions. And when I first heard the Persuasions, one of the finest a cappella groups ever to grace the stage, I heard songs like Buffalo Soldier and Temptations Jam. When I heard these guys, it took me back to the street corners, because being one of those kids that didn't get to the instrument room in time, could always sing. And under the gaslight every night, there was somebody singing. So that was kind of a cool thing, once the players of instruments moved on and there were no more instruments to play, where the singers were always there and ready to go, and you had to know your parts. And if you want to hear a cappella music at its best, the Persuasions are the ones to check out. And the Nylons, Canada's own, were influenced very much by seeing the Persuasions the very first time. And I got to co-produce them with my buddy Bradley Damon, who went on to do Michael Jackson. But the Nylons, it was, when I first heard them, I wanted to combine their music with hip hop way back in the day. Back before and around the time of Grandmaster Flash. I heard a song by the nylon's called Combat Zone, and I wanted to do a little rap thing with it. And I always wanted to work with them, and I met them at the Junos and gave them all these cassettes of hip hop and said, look, this is what we can do. This is what we can do, because hip hop and a cappella hadn't really joined forces yet. Hip hop hadn't really joined forces with anything at that point in time. And funny, 30 years ago, I guess, I was one of the godfathers of hip hop, because I was the very first person to play it on radio, more or less, other than the message that was being broke by CFNY and played by
Yep.
everybody that thought they were hip and cool. But there was hip hop way before then. I go back to the days of Gil Scott-Heron and The
Yes.
Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Also, Lowell Folsom, Scratch My Back, and The Madison Time by Ray Bryant, even How to Make a Hit Record by Brooke Benton. These are all records where they had talking on these records as opposed to singing. The talking was more or less rhymes, poetry, and sometimes songs in another form, you know. But we go back, and I was just talking to some of my MCs from Montreal and the DJ Butcher T, and I talked to the devastating Blondie B, who is probably the best, one of the best MCs of all time in Canada that Canada should definitely know about. She's a wonderful MC and a great writer, and that was sort of back in the day before I came to Much Music. I was in radio in Montreal and in radio in Cleveland. And I took all that, I brought all that with me to Much Music, and I enjoy radio even today.
So let me ask you, how did you get your start in radio in Cleveland?
High school. High school. I mean, my sister at the age of about 9, I think, I was about 8 or 9, my sister joined a contest for a station. I believe it was WABQ or WJMO, one of the two black stations in Cleveland that I listened to constantly. But I listened to every station, CRW, WNCR, WMMS hadn't been around yet, but WNCR was the predecessor to MMS, which was a groundbreaking station. And black people were part of all of this, you know, which, so I never knew a world of music that I could not participate in. WMMS was put together, which was a heritage station for like 50 years in Cleveland, Ohio, as being the #1 rock and roll station for at least 40 years, voted by Rolling Stone magazine. There was a black man there by the name of Billy Bass that worked with John Gorman. They put that whole thing together with Denny Saunders and a bunch of great announcers. Well, before they went to MMS, they were at WNCR, and I used to hang out at WNCR. My original love for radio, you know, when the DJ said there was more music coming your way, I always waited, because if he did it right and his shit was tight, you know, you did, because it was a performance. Radio was entertainment, it was performance, but it was also music of the highest degree. And I always wanted to be involved in that. And I would listen when I was supposed to be asleep. You know those times when you're supposed to be asleep and your mom's going, "You're sleeping there, aren't you?"
Yep.
Yeah, right. I got my flashlight, I got my crystal radio, and I got my comic books under the covers, and I got a tent. My covers are made into a tent, man. And I'm like, you know, listening to all of this stuff. There was great announcers in Cleveland like Alan Douglas, David Spiro, again, Billy Bass, who cornered the market. And there was one fellow that did radio and did TV, and I thought he was brilliant. Ken Hawkins. There was a little old white lady who was one of my favorite people in the world and a great mentor to me, even though she probably didn't know it. Her name was Dorothy Fuldine. She was one of the best interviewers in the country. And everyone stopped by and see her. So these people influenced me, and you know, my sister joined this contest, and she won the contest to be a DJ on like WABQ for like a month. And I went with her to the station, and I didn't think it was the loneliest place in town, but really, if you're an announcer there in the middle of the night, it is the loneliest place in town.
Yep. Nighttime
And
nighttime DJing on the radio.
oh yeah, man. And so I went there with her. She was in one room, I was in the other room. I listened to her, and it was all fine and good, but I dreamt about what I wanted to do in radio. And it was those dreams that I just continue to try and fulfill. And I have many of them, but you know, my final goal is possibly to own a radio station. I've always wanted to do that, but it's less important now to own a physical station as opposed to you can do it online,
Yep.
and those physical stations aren't disappearing as quickly as we think they are, but they're kind of going. And if you listen to radio, most of it's kind of, there isn't a lot of great radio out there these days. There's a lot of shit, but there isn't a lot of really great radio. And in Canada, of course, they claim that they have black radio, but we really don't. And in the US, it's changed as well. You find the more interesting hip hop movements going on AM, and that are playing AM stations that are playing old school hip hop. And there isn't a lot of R&B radio. There just isn't playing the spectrum and the breadth of black music from one end to the other. There just isn't. But if you look at the various niches and the fact that you have the internet, you can find a lot of stuff out there for sure. There's a lot of music available. There isn't a lot of great radio available. And now people like Apple Music are making all the vanity stations, be it Drake or Bob Dylan. Everybody's got a station, right?
Good. What made you leave Cleveland, and where did you go after leaving Cleveland?
Well, nothing really made me leave Cleveland, but I was a member of Student Council, and later on, I was in the Council on Human Relations as well. I was a member of the Cleveland Club and City, so I was doing and I did a lot of political work when I was in those younger years too. I worked for Gilligan for governor, blah blah blah. Those things, believe it or not, helped me get my very first radio job, which I had after basketball practice, because I played basketball, I ran track, played football, the whole gamut. I was a jock. I was a double letter man. After I got my double letters, then I went downtown to work at a radio station, which I got through a political connection. And that was at a classical station. The first station that I worked at where I actually received payment was at a classical station, WCLV in Cleveland, Ohio. It's the Cleveland Orchestra station. Beautiful, wonderful station. Again, heavy influence on my life, on my musical taste, and how I do things. You don't do anything alone. All these people that I met along the way, Albert Petrak, Robert, Conrad, all of the announcers, really took an interest in me as a student, So I started my my professional radio career then in Cleveland, Ohio. And first time I went away from Cleveland would have gone on a trip with the Council on Human Relations. We went to Washington, D.C. and all of that. Then my school was in the Collinwood District in Cleveland, Ohio. The Collinwood District is a riot zone. Every spring, every fall, we have riots. They were race riots. Before there were black students there, there was the displaced, what they call themselves, the DPs, or the displaced people. That would be people from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Italy, wherever after World War II they were displaced. They came to America, colonized that area when they felt threatened by other people coming in. So at one point, the area where I went to school, it was like all these displaced people from World War II, and then there were what they called the hillbillies coming from Kentucky and Tennessee right below, in southern Ohio, right below us. And they would come up and work in the steel mills and stuff like that, because Cleveland is a very big steel town, just like Pittsburgh is. And so while they were together, they would still have riots and they would still fight. It would be the Italians against the hillbillies, or the Czechoslovakians against the Italians, or whatever. But then when black kids started getting bused to the school, or started to go to the school, and I was one of those black kids, as was my sister, they decided they would rise up against us, because we had visible differences. It just wasn't ideological or social differences. We had physical differences, and they could see that. So they sort of attacked en masse, and then that was the area that I came out of. Because of the violence and the trouble in that area, people like Bill Cosby would come to the school, and the riots would stop for a week because Bill Cosby was there, right? And Up With People. And I don't know if you're familiar with Up With People. It's a group
Yep.
put together by Jay Blanton Belk out of Arizona. He was a philanthropist. It started as a thing called Sing Out, then came to this thing being Up with People that did the iconic and legendary I Like to Teach the World to Sing commercial, and which was partially their theme. But the great thing about Up with People was that they came to our school. We were kids. We were all cool. We were hip. We thought they were corny as hell. They started the show and we're like just about throwing things at them and yelling at them and catcalling and all this stuff. And everybody did it. Black kids, white kids, they were all like we were just making fun of them. But by the end of the show, they had us in the palm of their hand and they had us listening to the messages in song. And I thought that was interesting and that was active. And I talked to them because I worked in the theater at school. So I would have helped them set up and stuff like that. I met them. And so I talked to them while they were setting up. I talked to them after the show. And then a couple of guys, we got together after the show and we started to talk. And I asked them questions about what they did and how they did it and what they like and da 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 da. And at the end of that conversation, they said, I said, well, maybe I'd like to get an interview for the group. And they said, well, we just did interview you. During the course of the conversation, I got a scholarship for Up with People that paid
Wow.
for 3/4 of my trip. And we put a little bit of money in there as well. And that's when I left. I was about 16 and I went to join Up with People. That was the only reason why I left Cleveland other than visiting family. And that got me in a tour of the world, which was pretty amazing. I was, as a member of Up with People, I sang, I danced, and eventually I played an instrument. I played percussion and stuff like that, did lead vocals on a couple of songs, and was a lead dancer in the chorus line in the front doing jazz dancing. And it was all great. And it was people that I still communicate with that are my family, my
Nice.
larger family. And they are every color under the sun, from every place up under the sun. And they are and have always been and always will be my family, my Up with People family. And they do good work. They do really good work. And the people that break off from that, or even after we leave that, one of the things that we always try and do is that we give, and we share our time and we spend time with people. And one of our group members, when they had the earthquakes in the Himalayas, Mount Everest and around there, he went there, and he just started doing what he could. And we all couldn't be there, but you know what? We all could support him financially to be there.
Nice.
So, stuff like that. And it's kind of like an each one, teach one. And the kicker line of the song of Up with People is, if more people were for people everywhere, there'd be a lot less people to worry about and a lot more people who care. And so that stays
Nice.
with me in my heart, no matter how corny people may think it is, it works.
Nice.
One on one, it absolutely works. So that's why I left Cleveland the very first time. And during that period, I met Canadians.
Ah,
And so that's what eventually got me to Canada. But which is one of the best places to live in the world. By no means perfect, but I think that's the joy in Canada, is that it's not all cast in stone.
was
We can actually change things still.
was the first city that you went to in Canada Montreal?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes. And I was lucky to have that happen, man. In Montreal, you kidding me? Being a young man going to Montreal, and meeting people there, and then driving over the mountain that one time, that first time, and seeing the city lights that Gino Vanelli describes. And I just want to stop. Whew, man, I tell you, breathtaking city. Flying into it at night and flying out of it at night. I mean, you do that bank around the mountain there, which is the oratory on Mount Royal, and it's just a beautiful place. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and it was the people of Montreal that really fell in love with me, and I fell in love with them. Used to party with Celine Dion at her office, Feelings Inc., down in old Montreal. We'd be dancing to AC/DC and just sort of hanging out. Montreal is just a
Wow.
wonderful place, and if I had landed any place else, I don't know, but in Montreal, it was absolutely magic. Yeah.
How did you get your first radio gig in Montreal?
Um, Well, I worked at my university station, which was Loyola. Then it became Concordia, which was the amalgamation of Loyola and Sir George. So actually, my first radio gigs were in Cleveland. At WMMS was the first time I was on the air on a commercial radio station. What happened was the station had changed hands from Nationwide Insurance to whatever, and as the regime changed, so would the soundtrack of the station and the format, the people that worked there, and the whole 9 yards. They would keep a skeleton staff that I knew those people as well, secretaries and stuff like that. But all the people that made decisions were changing. So on one night, I'm at the station as usual till about midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever. I would always get home by 6. And I was kind of a gopher at the station, but I also had the keys to the place. Like I would engineer interviews and stuff like that, big interviews, like with the Beach Boys, and I would meet people and hang out with my radio mentor. My direct radio mentors were David Spiro and Enos Lynn Doyle, who was a black man working at a rock and roll station. So which is where my heart was. And as the station changed hands, people started saying, I'm not coming to my shift. I'm not going in. I'm not doing anything. That big harump because they're losing their jobs going on or not. So there were a number of announcers that didn't show up for their shifts, but I was there. and they just go, look, nobody's coming in for a while. So you just go. You know what you're doing, or you will by the time you finish.
Right.
And I had my sets of music all together. I knew what I was doing. And, I tried not to talk on the air, but I did. And I'm sure I sounded like a child. My voice didn't always sound like this. It changed probably when I was about, 9, 10, 11. And it began to change. But that was the first time I went on the air. My first Canadian radio gig would have been at, other than university, would have been at Shom FM.
Right.
In Montreal. And that's after I did the Pointed Sticks tour. I toured with a great punk band from Canada called the Pointed Sticks out of Vancouver, still around. And I was their tour manager and stuff. And we toured the country. And when we came back, I walked into the radio station where I had been before, asking them to play the record. And the PD, Rob, said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm trying to, figure out how I can eat 3 times a regular day, 3 times a day on a regular basis. I had grown to become accustomed to that to a certain extent.
Okay.
Not so much in university, but being on the road, And he says, well, we need an announcer. And that was like music to my ears. I've been waiting for someone to say that to me. And so I came in and got there on the overnight shift. This fellow, Neil, a.k.a. Spud, taught me the board and stuff like that, which was no teaching. I mean, this is what I was doing, man. I always had a DJ set up in my house,
right?
To a certain extent, and tape machines and stuff. So, and I went in, learned the system and stuff. The first thing I said is, how do you cheat the system? He says, why do you want to know? I said, then I know exactly how it works. And so he taught me, and he didn't teach me how to cheat it, but I taught myself. And then I went on, like maybe the next couple of days, we went over the tapes, and I got like 1 or 2 days a month on Shom FM, and it just grew from there. And I was ready for that opportunity. I had been working at that for, since I was 8, 9 years old, and this is, and I'm in my late teens, early 20s. I'm ready for this. And we rocked, baby. I mean, I still love the station. It's not as good as it used to be, I got to tell you. And it's not just because of its generational thing. It's just because of who owns it now, what they've done to it, or whatever, and radio has changed immensely. But it was one of my favorite stations in the world because there was a wonderful combination of Montreal being sort of a musical sister city to Cleveland in terms of what was
Nice.
explored in both places and the
Okay.
vastness
Right.
and the heart and the simpatico about the music. Things that I listened to in Cleveland, people were listening to in Montreal. Genesis was the biggest thing next to sliced bread in Montreal, and I had seen Genesis in Cleveland as an opening band. Pink Floyd, anything for Pink Floyd and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I was involved in the Dark Side of the Moon tour in Cleveland, Ohio. And so, it was a wonderful experience to go from Cleveland to Montreal and find musical simpatico, musical warmth, and a musical family. So that was my first real radio gig, day in, day out. It went from part time twice a month to being, full time on two different stations. And I eventually worked AM and FM simultaneously, which no one really ever does in a large major market. And I had the privilege and the honor to do that, which is great because the AM really tightened me up for my FM shift. And the AM gave me a lot more creativity, and the FM station gave me a format that I had to learn how to be creative within.
Let me ask before we continue the journey here. You're mentioning a number of rock or progressive rock bands.
Hmm.
Back in your younger days, were there many people of color in those environments? And how did it feel being in those environments? Because I don't think you'd see a lot of black people at an Emerson, Lake and Palmer concert, at a Pink Floyd concert. Maybe I'm wrong, but you would know better because you were in
Well,
those
I tell
environments.
you, in Cleveland, it wasn't abnormal,
Okay.
because Billy Bass co-designed WMMS,
Yep.
and Enos Lynn Doyle, my mentor, was his best friend, and he was working at WNCR when Billy left, and even when Billy was there. So there were always people of color. It didn't seem to be abnormal to me,
Okay.
to be in those situations. And I mean, yeah, I was in parties and situations where I was the only black person in the room, but that was only if they made me feel that way. And there was always a certain amount of danger growing up in America, stepping out of your house and being black. A lot of times you weren't sure whether you coming home that night, and neither were your family. But back in those days, I would say my mother could step on the porch, yell my name, and 5 minutes later somebody say, "Yo, Michael, your mom's was calling you for dinner, man." Like, how long ago? 15 minutes ago. So it was that simple. It was that calm. It was that wonderful. It was that sort of openly spiritual, but openly community as well. And so that was the same community of music and musicians there. It was pretty open. It was pretty open. And there were, in my neighborhood, we all knew how to play on guitar and drums and bass the very first album by Black Sabbath and the second album by Black Sabbath.
Wow.
We all knew that. Durr, 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 and we were playing this shit in our basement just like white kids and everybody else was. So it was more about the love and the music. So it wasn't, I didn't find it difficult.
Okay.
I just found all situations with music to be loving
Yep.
and to be warm and to be a little bit more honest than most. And also, it gave us a common platform for communication.
Yes.
So the neighborhood could change, but the feeling was the same.
Nice. How did you move from Montreal to Toronto?
With great difficulty. With great difficulty, because I felt safer when I would come down to Toronto and work here for 4 or 5 days and get back on a plane and go back to Montreal, where life was. I knew what life was there. I was never a Toronto sort of person. I would always drive through Toronto, and Toronto seemed to be a place for business. There was never a day being a Montrealer or a Quebecer where Toronto was over Montreal in terms of arts, culture, sports, just about anything. We had the Canadians. you know, we had the Canadians. The Alouettes didn't really matter, but we had the Canadians, and that was it. We had the Expos, and that was kind of okay. At one point in time, we had Jackie Robinson there,
Yep.
so that was kind of okay. And it wasn't okay for him in the beginning, just like myself, but it became great for him in the end. So, with great difficulty, and Montreal just always was a city really with a heart, and Toronto was a city with a purse, a pocketbook, and it was very much so work oriented,
Do you
more or less.
do you
And it
think
was like Canada's New York. Everybody came here to be discovered.
do you think that has changed over the time, or did you still feel it the same?
Um, Well, I'm in Oakville now. I'm not in Toronto, but the love for Montreal never disappears,
Right.
you know. But I got a love for Vancouver. I got the same love for Newfoundland, for St. John's, and all over Newfoundland. I have an undying love for Canada, but sometimes when you're in Toronto, you feel like you're in the most un-Canadian city in the country.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Because it's more of a business hub.
Yeah.
It's very much so a business hub. I spent time in Grand Forks last year hosting the CanaFest, man. And I got to tell you, I felt like I had come home. I've never been to Grand Forks except for driving through and maybe a minor stop. But, there's no place in this country where I don't feel at home. And that's because of the work that I've done on TV, but also for the love that people have for what I did.
Right. How did you land the gig at Much?
How did I land the gig at Much? Montreal, hip hop was popping. I was in the front of that. All the MCs from DJ Ray to Blondie B to the Quality Crew, DJ Butcher T, the Classy Crew, another fantastic crew. All of them were doing really well in terms of the records weren't for sale, but everybody was trading cassettes. It was a real community sort of thing. And I was also working at a rock station, Shom FM at the time, and CKGM, where I did a show called Club 980, which I didn't name that. My boss named it. What I named the show eventually a couple of years later was Soul in the City. So
Yes.
Soul in the City was a 6-hour radio show from 6 to midnight. So what would happen is that I would work on Shom throughout the week, midnight to 6. And then on the weekends, I would do day shifts. I'd be on from, let's say, noon to 4, or 11 to 4 or 5, take a 1 hour break, grab a bite to eat, go across the street to another studio where I had cases of records, and it was spontaneous combustion, baby. It was on. It was on for
Wow.
6 hours.
Wow.
And on that show was everybody from Tina Turner to Terry Lewis and Jimmy Jam to Stevie Wonder to Stray Cats. It was like, it was a free for all. It was just great. And one day, these rappers walked in and they said, "We're doing a show. Can we promote it on your show?" I said, "Sure, we can do a little something in the studio. Let's go and let's see what you got." And we went into the studio and they were phenomenal. They were just even compared to today's standards, they were phenomenal and better than a lot of things out there today. And I said, "Wow, this is pretty exciting." And they said, "Yeah, we'd like to do a little promo for you because we listened to your show." And I was, "My show? Really?" "Yeah." And they did. And it was, again, phenomenal. Became a commercial on the station. And then we went in and recorded a whole shitload of tunes, man. And those tunes were only heard on my show. So you could tape them off the show and you could trade them with people and stuff like that. And it's kind of, how that thing began. And through that, I was out one night at a club called Checkers over on Park Avenue where everybody was playing. I think we went to go see Kinky Fox. Great band. Wonderful tune called So Different. Their only record, but some of the members are still living in Montreal. They're originally from New York. And I walked in with a couple rappers. I think I had Blondie B and the Classy Crew with me, Wavy Wan and the girls. And I walk in and I see a friend of mine from university, Zoe Stotland, who's passed, and give her a second. And she's sitting there with a woman, Catherine McCartney Brown at the time. And I started talking to Zoe. "Hey, how you doing?" Blah, blah, blah. I knew her school, Montreal, and we're both still in Montreal. And she says, "Do you know Catherine?" And Catherine's management and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I meet Catherine, and Catherine asked me to meet her the next day to talk to me about possibly some management opportunities and other work opportunities. I didn't know that these were going to be in Toronto or whatever, and she was the first one who mentioned this thing called MuchMusic. that was being done by one of her former clients or current clients, Moses Neimer.
Right.
Oh, really? Okay, fine. So, again, I'm still working at two different radio stations. I'm writing for the Sunday paper here, the Sunday Express, a music column on the record. I'm doing the two radio stations, all the interviews with those stations. I had been a DJ under the name of Jason Stan and Company, my partner Stan Darville from the Bahamas. That's how we made it through school, was that we DJ'd. And I mean, we DJ'd. This is back at the beginning. This is back when Flash was still had a close and play, so like that. And so Zoe had told her about some of the stuff that I'd done, and she said, "Great, why don't you meet me tomorrow?" It was going to be a Sunday, and so I went down to this hotel and met her, and she told me all about MuchMusic and all that, and said, "You need a demo tape." Well, I had done an edit for a fellow named David McNally, who did the film Coyote Ugly eventually. He was a video director in Montreal, and he needed an edit done for to make a music piece fit into a video. I did it for him. He says, "Well, I'll do you a favor now." I called him up and said, "I need a demo tape shot." So one night when I was on from midnight to 6, he came in with a little camera, a light, turn on all the lights, then turn them all off, get that moody sort of feeling of what it felt like to be on at night. And I did a dissertation, and he filmed it. And at the end of it, I said, "Thank you for your time, and I hope your money," and not knowing City TV and MuchMusic at the time, money wasn't really ever on the table.
Right.
They will tell you, we got all the cameras in the world, we got editing bays, we got airtime, we got no money, right? And I did that tape and I sent it down to MuchMusic on VHS, and they couldn't watch it in the building because they didn't have a VHS machine any place in the building.
Come
So
on.
they had to go next door
Come on.
they had to go next door to Henry's camera to watch
Yes.
my demo tape,
Oh
which
my.
was, which was
Get it. They
just
didn't have a V. Come on, Mike.
there was no VHS tape in the building, dude. They had three quarter and beta and all
Yeah.
that stuff, but there was no VHS machine in the building.
Wow.
And what I had done was that she had told me about the opening party for MuchMusic,
Yeah.
and Moses came to town, and like at 7 o'clock in the morning, I got off at 6. They were throwing a party at 7 o'clock in the morning announcing MuchMusic. So I went to the party. I'm standing at the bar there getting an orange juice. I'd just gotten off of work. I've been working all night for a couple nights. And he came up to me and he says, "You must be Michael Williams." I said, "Well, you must be Moses." And that was the beginning of a wonderful relationship for a number of years till the end of that. And I went to the MuchMusic party, and before I was working there. And if you look in some of the pictures, you'll see me in the background of a lot of pictures, which was very funny. And I met a few people, and it was a great party. I mean, they threw the best damn parties ever. Um, Everybody from Rush to Sylvia, Vian and Sylvia was there. Gowan was there. Everybody was there in the Canadian music industry in Toronto, mostly. Not a lot of people from Montreal came down, but in Toronto. And, it was still that period of Canadian music where most people thought Canadian music just came out of Toronto as opposed to Montreal, which I knew it was coming out of Montreal because there was so much wonderful stuff there in English and French, and in Vancouver as well, and all across the country. And I've been honored to be a part of the musical fabric of Canada, and that's quite the story to tell and to write about. So that's part of what my book is about. It's going to be from Canada, from Cleveland to Canada,
Yeah.
and from Canada to beyond. Just being a part of it, and being a cheerleader of it, and being part midwife as well, because there were never a lot of black artists or successful black artists past Oscar Peterson in this country for a number of years. And I think that I've helped to inspire many, from Drake on, or from Drake back before. And also I gave people an outlet. You came to me with a record or something like that, I'm going to play it at least once or twice just to get the vibe. and and that's once or twice on air, and we're gonna talk, and then you do what you do. And I've been honored to go into the studio with LMT Connection, produce them. I've engineered a whole bunch of things. I did some of the original rap sessions with those rappers in Montreal, which, by the way, I have all the masters on.
Nice.
They
Nice.
sound, I'll send them to you. They sound great. We're going to do something with that. But we're all going to get together. I think, I just talked to Blondie B for the first time in 30 years.
Oh
And,
my.
she's in Florida. And I talked to Butcha T, who's in Montreal. Sean Wan and Supreme. These are all the rappers from my show. They're out there somewhere. And I'm just trying to find people, because it was all these people that, that helped me, that heard me, that understood me. You do nothing alone, right? So these are all people along the way. And so it's time to pay honor and tribute and to properly tell the story. Because if you look at Toronto, um, they tell the story that hip hop began there. It didn't. It was Montreal. And the show that I was doing, that predated what Ron Nelson was doing here by a number of years, and what you heard in the rest of the country. Plus, we were going in doing sessions once a week, just recording whatever came off the top of our head, whatever the rappers wanted to do. I'd go into the studio and do it with them. And these were pretty great quality recordings as well. So it's time to tell the story that has not been told.
Nice. Do you remember your first interview at Much, and who was it with?
Well, my first day at Much, where they tried me out, after they saw my demo tape, they asked me to come down, and I was on for 2 days, and then John Martin said, "Okay, you can stop. You can stop now. You got the job." Okay. My first interview at Much Music, my first two interviews at Much Music in the same day, were Run DMC
Wow.
and Lou Reed.
What a contrast.
Oh, and I introduced Lou Reed to Run DMC for the very first time.
Do tell that story, please.
It was great. Well, Run DMC I knew from Montreal. I had been playing Rockbox. Once I heard Rockbox on Run DMC, I thought I had landed in heaven. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. It was exactly what was going on in my mind, but in my neighborhood as well, and they got it. So that's, if you listen to Run DMC, every group back in the day of early hip hop was only as good as their DJ. And their DJ was only as good as their MCs. So it was that perfect combination of them working in harmony and unison that made it great. And Rockbox by Run DMC was just a monumental record. People don't even listen to it and know how important it is. Eddie Martinez on guitar, whoa, that shit was just jamming. And so I was a huge fan of Run DMC. And this is long before Raising Hell, debut album. And when I got to Much Music, first thing I wanted was Sade's Smooth Operator video and Run DMC Rockbox. And I called to New York, and they sent that shit up to me right away. So I had the video and stuff. Run DMC's there, and I'm saying, but you got to do it live, and I got them going off live and everything. Lou Reed walks in. Lou wasn't in the greatest of moods that day. He had his arm in a sling. I guess he had broken it, but he was still going to perform. But my secret was that I went up to Lou and I said, "How you doing?" And he didn't really want to talk, blah, 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 blah. And I said, "How's Garland?" And he said, "What?" I said, "How's Garland? Garland Jeffries, your friend. He's a good friend of mine." "Really? You know Garland?" Well, after he found out that I was, a big friend and fan of Garland Jeffries. And by the way, the whole city of Montreal is a fan of Garland Jeffries. Okay, that's how influential he was in terms of that Ghostwriter album. That was incredible. So one of my first interviews, print interviews, was with Garland Jeffries, and I flew down to New York and I met him. And so we had become buds. And so when Lou found out that, he was like kind of melted, and he was just cool. He was mine at that point. And Run DMC was still hanging around the studio. I said, "Yo, you know Run DMC?" "No, I don't." "Run, you know Lou?" "No." "This is the great Lou Reed, Velvet Underground. This is Jam Master Jay, Run DMC right here. This is the Rev, and this is
Oh,
it. This is shit."
wow.
Put them together. They all shook hands and everything like that. And I don't know. I don't think that was Lou's introduction to hip hop, maybe, but he talked fondly of them after that, and vice versa. And that was a wonderful time. That was a great time. I mean, it was everybody from Philip Glass to to Laurie Anderson to
Oh, Superman.
Randy Travis to Reba
Yeah,
McEntire.
yeah.
To what's his name? One of my favorite interviews was Screaming Jay Hawkins.
Oh, yeah.
He pulled up in a hearse, and I'm not sure if Jay is from Cleveland or not, but he pulled up to the station in a hearse doing his shtick, came out with the bones through his nose and all that. But Screaming Jay Hawkins, what an incredible musician, and his song catalog. Oh my God! Have you ever heard Constipation Blues?
Yes, I have. That is real. That
Yeah,
is real.
I
That's
heard that at a
real.
Frank Zappa and the Mothers concert, and I went off. I thought it was great. So my first interview though, Run DMC, Lou Reed, put them together. It was a good day.
Wow. Well, folks, we're going to fade it out here because Mike has had a long day, but you can see that hopefully in conversations to come, he's going to drop some great knowledge bombs and experiences. But before we let him go, I'm going to take a little bit of a turn, but I know Mike can handle this. What are your thoughts as a black man who's lived in America and who's also lived in Canada about we're on the 25th anniversary of the LA riots?
Hmm.
And I know that you have some thoughts, and I know you didn't expect to comment on it, but I know what
Hmm.
I've shared when you shared with me, I know that there's something on your mind and your heart that you'd like to give some perspective on that. So if you could, anything you have to just share in regards to that LA 25, maybe where you were when that happened, and what has anything changed?
Well, first of all, my first experience with riots would have been in the 60s in Cleveland, Ohio, where they called
Right.
them race riots, but there was really only one race there, and the police. Okay. So that's when all of a sudden we started putting up the Soul Brother signs to know which businesses to burn and which businesses not to burn. But anything that you burned your own neighborhood, you know what I mean? And you took something from another family. So that wasn't good. So that was my first experience with riots. And then again in my school, Collinwood School, where I met up with people. And then in the LA riots, it was interesting because I was down around there then, just after the riots, just before the riots, because we were going to LA all the time to do work, right? And so I was down there and I was with Ice-T at his house. And we were flying back to Canada and I just went over to his house and talked to the camera on the fence. Saying, yo, Ice, thank you very much, love you, blah, 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 blah. And I was just saying goodbye because I couldn't reach him on the phone. So I was doing that. And as I got ready to turn around and drive back to the hotel and get on the plane, a bunch of cars pulled up, and it was Ice and his crew. They opened the gates and said, push on through. And they started to tell me about riot time and what was going on and what was happening and everything. And, I always felt that. I mean, they said it was, it's never about what they say it's about. You know what I mean? Like, it's just basically the American melting pot boiling over. And being American born and bred, I completely understand that. But, and having gone through situations like that, which were probably about the same or worse, because ours kind of went on. The LA riots happened 25 years ago,
Yep.
and our riot situation just kept going every year, a couple times, 3, 4 times a year. You always had to watch your back. You always had to, if I got to school late, I could be killed.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And there was a couple times where I almost was. If I walked instead of took the bus, I could be killed. So, um, just the fact that it's what 2017 and we still even have to talk about race,
Yeah.
you know, I find that a little sick. But looking back upon those times, and the whole Rodney King situation, which was a spark plug for a great deal of it, or at least so people say. We found out so much more after, and if we could have found out so much more before, maybe they wouldn't have happened. But it's just a matter, for me, it's a matter of communication, you know, of when people have no outlets for communication, they have no outlets for change. And every once in a while, that American melting pot kind of boils over because things are trapped at the pot, maybe in the bottom, maybe at the top, but they just feel like they have to get out. And we have so many ways to communicate now. We have so many different uh, modes of communication, and yours is one of them. You know, there are more podcasts discussing real topics than on the radio. You know, radio could learn something from podcasts for sure. You know, get up and say something, get up and do something, move something. What did Eric B. and Rakim say? Move the
Move the
crowd.
crowd. Yep.
Move the crowd. So
Move
for
the
me,
crowd.
that's what it's always been about, is to move the crowd, but move the crowd in a positive way,
Right.
not in a negative way. You
Excellent.
know, just like I think Black Lives Matter is a wonderful movement, it eventually has to become political or something. But Black lives also have to matter when the finger on the trigger is black,
Understood.
you know.
Yep.
And so by not addressing that, we leave ourselves open to r- righteous criticism, you know? So it's sort of like the whole debate on marijuana in Canada. You know, if you're going to be a part of the big business, you're good. But if you leave right around the corner selling nickel bag, you're bad.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
You know?
Well, you know what? We'll close it off there after our first epic conversation. Like to thank you for taking the time and being patient
Oh,
and bringing joy for me after 7 years. Is so much worth it. Would you,
I hope so.
no, absolutely.
Great,
What
man.
stuff are you working on, or what stuff do you have coming up that you'd like to share with the
Uh,
audience?
Okay, we've got a few. I've been doing live music shows here in Oakville, where I live, and we've been doing them for at least a year and a half now. Started well out with a wonderful gypsy band, Romani Rota from Hungary, and we still work with them. And it's all types of music. It's just not one type of music, which makes it interesting. And then we put musicians together, sort of. It's a show that I produce live, as if I'm in the studio. So I'll do the sound, not very much lighting, but I bring people in and I want you to hear what I hear. I want you to enjoy what I heard and enjoyed and what got me excited. I want to share that with you. We also have an open mic thing that we do as part of that, where we've discovered an enormous amount of young talent out here that's just outstanding. And on the 7th, downtown at Whistler's, we're going to expand our program with a benefit for the Ontario Black History Society. Tickets are $25. Special guest Liberty Silver, Eddie Bullen, and the number one DJ that everybody learned from here back in the day in Toronto, JC of the Sunshine Crew, is going to come out with Paul Chen and myself, the masters of the old school, should we say, or the music heads. And we are going to play tunes that you haven't heard in a long time, since the days of Network, Blue Note, The Tube, and before. Taking you to that Twilight Zone sort of feeling. And people are going to just be able to come out and dance. And through their dance and celebration, they will be donating to the OBHS. That's on the 7th. On the 12th, going to be in Hamilton, Liberty Silver and Eddie Bullen once again at the Pearl Company in Hamilton. And on the 14th, which is Mother's Day, in Oakville, again at Taste of Columbia, we're going to have Lisa Hart and Terry Crawford, who does this incredible song called Gunfighter, that I'll send you, that I'm thinking about re-releasing. And, you know, they're going to be performing again live. So we got music, we got live music, we've got recorded music that we've done with Willie Williams and people like that. I finished an album that I've been working on for 40 years, so now I've just got to figure out how to release it. You can't work on something for 40 years and just throw it out there like nobody cares, or like you don't care anymore. You have to give it that love and attention and time that took into making it. Hopefully, my son's going to do the cover for the album. I'm hoping it'll be a box set. And I'm kind of archiving my career, but also looking at new things and new opportunities that I can not only experience myself, but give to others and help to produce their projects and stuff like that. We're looking at television stuff, some film stuff. You know, what it is now is that I've just formed a new company, Grey Dread Productions Incorporated. And that handles everything that I am and everything that I do, and a few other things as well. We're also selling our first film series online through Great Red Productions Inc. You can buy The Obama Effect, which is a film that Jojo Cento and I did on the effect of President Obama's first election on Canadian blacks. And we have a series that I hope to continue called Outstanding Canadians, which features outstanding black Canadians, but will feature outstanding Canadians from all communities.
And this material that one can buy, where can they purchase it?
If you go to, I have a store, Grey Dread Productions Inc.
Okay.
And you'll be able to purchase that stuff, and I'll get you a link too.
Yes,
that
if you
might be a
can.
little bit easier that you can post up.
Yeah, that'd be
you can
great.
watch some of the stuff on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and Outstanding Canadians is there, and a few other projects that I've been working on.
Yeah, if you can send me any of that information, I can post it on the with the post of the replay of our conversation. I'd be more than happy to share that out with my network. So, Mike, thanks again for taking the time.
Man.
Yeah, this was really good, and I hope you have some time from all the craziness to do some work, because there's more for you to share, and I really appreciate it and don't take it for granted.
Well, you know, let me know when you want to do it. On the weekends is good for me.
Okay, well, it's
even next Monday, man. I'm
okay.
Good.
Okay, well, we'll chat offline on this. It's Dr. Vibe here. I'm host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations, and it is the place for Epic Conversation. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. If you want to touch base with me, the three best ways: Twitter at DRVIBESHOW. You can catch me online, website address www.thedrvibeshow.com, email address dr.vibe@thedrvibeshow.com. You can catch my conversations on a number of different platforms, such as iTunes, such as YouTube, such as the Good Men Project. There's WJMS Radio out in New York. There's Stitcher. There's Tuned In Radio. There's iHeartRadio. There's many, many more. Google Play Radio. So, you know, it's all about distribution. And that's some of the knowledge I've been sharing with Mike. And I know that he'll be taking and using as he goes ahead in his new digital journey. So as always, I'd like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. If you're watching this live, great. If you're watching this on replay, great. Tomorrow night on the Dr. Vibe Show live audio, have an editor from Vibe Magazine who's going to talk about Prince's 29 tours, rating them from the best to the not so best. He's going to be on tomorrow night. So 29 tours of Prince he's going to talk about. So as always, I like to say, sometimes you got to get smaller to get stronger. Thanks again for watching, and Mike will be back. Take care and God bless.